Imagine you were running the IT department for a major hospital network, right? You open your software renewal bill for your critical server infrastructure.
The digital backbone.
Exactly. The stuff that keeps patient records online, runs the ER dashboards, processes every single billing claim.
Basically the lifeblood of the hospital.
Right. And you're expecting, a standard inflation bump. But instead, the price hasn't just gone up. It has jumped by a staggering 1,000%.
Oh, man.
Yeah. The budget you meticulously planned for the year is just, well, it's completely obliterated. So today, we're looking at the hidden tech crisis squeezing global enterprises and how this desperate scramble for survival is reshaping the digital landscape. Welcome, everyone, to TechDaily.ai. I'm your host, David, and joining me today is our resident expert, Sophia.
It is fantastic to be here. We have a highly volatile, rapidly shifting landscape to explore today.
We absolutely do. But before we get started, this podcast is sponsored by Stonefly, your trusted solution provider and advisor in enterprise storage, backup disaster recovery, hyper-converged VMware, Hyper-V, Proxmox cluster, AI servers, SA365, a turnkey security appliance, public and private cloud. Check out stonefly.com for more info.
Excellent. So, where are we jumping in today?
Right, so today's deep dive is about a colossal hidden pressure cooker in the enterprise world. We're exploring the intense financial squeeze currently strangling major industries.
Using the 2026 U.S. healthcare sector as a prime example, right?
Exactly. And we're going to look at how this desperation to cut costs is colliding head-on with a historic multi-million-dollar pricing shock in the IT world. Okay, let's unpack this. To really understand the tech infrastructure shakeup that's happening right now, we first have to understand the sheer financial desperation of large-scale enterprises.
Right, and the healthcare industry is essentially ground zero for this entire phenomenon.
It really is. Just set the stage for us financially.
Well, when you look at the underlying data for the U.S. healthcare system right now, the strain is just, it's severe. We use EBITDA earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization as a measure of the industry's economic health.
Okay, the baseline profitability.
Right. And the numbers tell a very sobering story. So industry EBITDA as a percentage of national health expenditures dropped from 8.9% in 2024 to an estimated 8.7% by 2027.
I'll just stop you there because to a layperson, a drop from 8.9 to 8.7% sounds like, it sounds like a rounding error.
It sounds incredibly minor.
Yeah, who cares about 0.2%?
Right, but it only sounds small until you contextualize it within a multi-trillion-dollar industry.
Yeah.
That 0.2% drop represents literal billions of dollars simply vanishing from the healthcare ecosystem.
Wow, billions.
Exactly. And keep in mind, only a fraction of that EBITDA translates into actual net income. We're talking about operating margins that hover in the very low single digits.
Sometimes near zero, right?
Right.
Especially for those smaller regional hospitals.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes hovering right near zero. So when billions evaporate from that margin, hospital administrators are suddenly forced into these agonizing debates.
Like what?
Like whether they can afford to keep a rural clinic open or if they can even repair a broken MRI machine.
So the margin for error is effectively zero at this point. But what are the actual mechanics behind this? What are the specific pressures pushing these systems to the brink?
It's essentially a pair of twin pressures operating simultaneously. They're just squeezing the system from both sides.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, you have a severe revenue disruption on the payer side. We're seeing a sweeping wave of disenrollment from Medicaid and Affordable Care Act plans.
And that's largely driven by the expiration of those pandemic-era enhanced subsidies, right?
Right, combined with these stringent new policy changes under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OBBBA.
OBBA. And the mechanism there is adverse selection, I assume. Like when premiums go up or subsidies vanish, the healthiest people are the first to drop their coverage.
Because they feel they don't need it.
Exactly. They rarely go to the doctor anyway. And that leaves the insurers with a risk pool concentrated with members who require highly complex, expensive care.
Yep, and for the hospitals, it means a huge spike in uncompensated care when those newly uninsured people inevitably show up at the ER.
Because they can't turn them away.
Exactly. The revenue floor is just completely falling out. And that brings us directly to the second pressure.
Which is?
The explosive, unprecedented rise in medical costs. Pharmacy expenditures in particular are surging totally out of control. We recently saw an 11% spike in drug spending across the board.
Wow, 11%, that's massive.
And a major driver of that is the widespread clinical adoption of innovative therapies, specifically GLP-1 agonists.
Okay, those are the drugs primarily known for weight loss and diabetes management, right?
Yes, and their efficacy is undeniable, but their financial toll is staggering.
I can imagine.
I mean, if even 5% of an employer's workforce or a hospital's patient panel gets prescribed a therapy that costs roughly $1,000 a month indefinitely,
It mathematically breaks the pharmacy budget.
it completely shatters it. Because of these therapies, combined with high-cost specialty injectables for other chronic diseases, U.S. gross drug expenditure is projected to hit an astonishing $990 billion by 2029.
Almost $1 trillion on drugs.
Yeah.
So we're basically looking at a classic leaky bucket scenario, but on a macroeconomic scale. The guaranteed government and commercial revenue is draining out of the bottom due to disenrollment,
Right.
while the baseline operational costs, particularly pharmacy, are just overflowing at the top.
That captures the dynamic perfectly.
Yeah.
And to compound the issue, you have the demographic reality of an aging population.
Oh, sure, the baby boomers.
Yeah, the proportion of individuals aged 80 and above is steadily climbing, which mathematically tacks on an additional half to a full % of annual claims cost increases every single year. These massive systems are just backed into a corner.
But they can't just stop providing care. Like, you can't close the emergency room at 5 p.m. to save on payroll.
Yeah, absolutely not.
So they have to find a way to do significantly more with significantly less. They need incredible operational efficiency, which I imagine almost always means leaning heavily into automation and technology.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is within this incredibly somber financial landscape, health services and technology, or HST, is booming.
Really booming despite the budget cut.
Yeah, it's projected to see 9% annual growth. Because of this margin crush, healthcare providers simply must outsource administrative operations and rely on AI innovations just to keep the lights on.
So it's not a luxury anymore.
No, it is no longer about buying shiny new gadgets. It is about deploying survival mechanisms.
I want to make that concrete for the listener. What does a survival-driven AI deployment actually look like in a hospital setting? Like, give me the mechanics of it.
Okay, let's look at ambient AI medical scribing. Traditionally, a doctor spends hours after their shift manually typing clinical notes into an electronic health record.
Which everybody hates doing.
Oh, it leads to massive physician burnout and limits how many patients they can actually see in a day. Ambient AI changes the mechanism entirely.
How so?
The technology securely listens to the natural conversation between the patient and the doctor, right there in the exam room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it uses natural language processing to parse that messy human interaction, separating the small talk from the actual clinical symptoms, and it instantly drafts a structured, billing-compliant clinical note.
So instead of the doctor trying to remember what a patient said about their knee pain 3 hours later, the AI structures it immediately.
Precisely. It's already being adopted by 10% or more of U.S. physicians. It takes a massively time-consuming, expensive manual workflow, automates it, and instantly boosts clinical productivity by hours per day.
Okay, so hospitals and enormous enterprises are betting their survival on IT and AI to save money.
Correct.
But to run all that sophisticated ambient AI, to process those billions of data points in the health records, you need immense server power.
You need a massive digital foundation.
Right. And just as hospitals reached for that technological life raft, the ocean they were floating in completely changed.
Ah, the virtualization crisis. This is the collision you mentioned at the start of the deep dive.
Yes, exactly.
So, to manage the vast server farms required for these AI tools, enterprises have historically relied on virtualization software. And for years, the undisputed foundational king of that software was VMware.
They were basically a monopoly, right?
In the enterprise space, absolutely.
Yeah.
But following Broadcom's $69 billion acquisition of VMware, the underlying laws of physics for enterprise data centers fundamentally changed almost overnight.
It was a huge shockwave. I mean, Broadcom didn't just tweak the pricing by a few percentage points.
No, they aggressively rewrote the entire rule book for how companies are allowed to buy and consume this software.
So what did they actually do? Break down the model shift?
Well, they overhauled the entire business model. First, Broadcom completely killed perpetual licenses.
Which means what exactly?
Well, under the old rules, a hospital could buy a software license once, install it on a server, and run it indefinitely. They'd only pay a modest, maybe 20 to 25% annual fee for support and security updates.
Sort of like buying a car and just paying for maintenance.
Exactly. Broadcom eliminated that ownership model and forced every single customer into a recurring subscription model.
Okay, so now you're renting.
Yes. Furthermore, they took over 160 different standalone products and collapsed them into just a few forced, highly expensive bundles. Primarily VMware Cloud Foundation, or VCF, and vSphere Foundation, VVF.
Meaning if you only needed like one specific tool to manage your storage, you're now forced to subscribe to an enormous premium suite of enterprise tools you'll likely never even turn on, just to keep your servers running.
Exactly. And it gets even more restrictive.
Really? How?
The most punitive mechanical change was the introduction of a 72-core minimum purchase requirement per subscription.
A 72-core minimum.
Yeah. In server architecture, physical processors have cores that handle the computing tasks. Many branch offices or smaller regional clinics use highly efficient servers with only 16 or 32 cores.
Because that's all they need.
Right. But under the new Broadcom rules, even if your physical machine only has 16 processing cores, you are contractually obligated to purchase a license for 72 cores.
That is brutal. It's like walking into a dealership to lease a highly efficient 4-cylinder commuter car, and the dealer tells you that you are legally required to pay for the insurance and fuel plan of an 18-wheel semi-truck.
That is a perfect analogy.
So how is this translating to the bottom line? Like when these temporary agreements expire and companies face their first full-rate renewal under Broadcom, what are the actual financial numbers looking like?
Well, the financial impact is causing absolute boardroom panic. Across the board, enterprise support and licensing costs have jumped 3 to 5 times higher than pre-acquisition levels.
3 to 5 times.
And that is strictly on the low end for highly optimized environments. Many customers are reporting catastrophic price hikes of 8 to 15 times their previous historical costs.
Wait, 15 times higher?
Yes. The most high-profile example rippling through the industry right now is AT&T, which faced a proposed 1,000% increase in its Broadcom renewal discussions.
1,000%. That's just wild. Here's where it gets really interesting. If a hospital or a logistics giant is suddenly hit with a multi-million-dollar tech tax, they can't just unplug their data centers.
No, you definitely can't do that.
You can't put patient life support monitors or global supply chains on pause while you shop around for a better deal.
Yeah.
So what is the immediate tactical response from these IT directors?
You're touching on the inherent trap of enterprise IT, the friction of migration. You cannot simply flip a switch and abandon ship.
It takes years.
It does, which is why industry analysts project that roughly 35% of VMware workloads will migrate to alternative platforms by 2028.
35% by 2028.
Yeah, that represents a seismic shift of roughly 140,000 customers. But in the immediate short term, the survival tactic is leverage and corporate bluffing. Companies are initiating highly structured alternative evaluations.
So they're actively standing up competing platforms in their data centers just to prove to the Broadcom sales rep that they have a credible functional threat of leaving.
Exactly that. Broadcom's account teams are fully aware that the market is furious and actively seeking alternatives. If an enterprise goes to the negotiation table empty-handed, they pay the premium.
Right.
But if they arrive with a documented technical evaluation of a competitor, complete with rigorous total cost of ownership modeling and a credible board-approved timeline for migration.
Then Broadcom is forced to take the threat seriously.
Exactly. In many documented cases, enterprises are securing 20 to 45% discounts off those initial exorbitant Broadcom proposals simply by proving they are willing and able to walk away.
Wow. It's literally a high-stakes game of corporate chicken. But eventually, you can't just bluff forever. You have to be willing to actually play the hand. So let's look at the actual escape routes.
Let's.
If a healthcare network decides the Broadcom tax is fundamentally unsustainable, where do they physically move their infrastructure?
There are 3 primary paths that have solidified as the most viable alternatives in this 2026 landscape. The first is Nutanix AHV.
Okay, Nutanix.
This is currently positioned as the leading premium enterprise alternative. It is what we call a hyper-converged infrastructure platform.
Hyper-converged, meaning what?
Meaning it tightly weaves the computing hypervisor, the storage management, and the networking into one cohesive system.
Okay, got it.
For an enterprise IT team accustomed to the polish of VMware, Nutanix offers a very comparable, highly refined management experience, while typically delivering a 30 to 50% lower total cost of ownership over a 3-year hardware cycle.
Okay, so Nutanix is the premium comparable replacement.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the cloud? I mean, Whenever there's an on-premises hardware crisis,
Yeah.
the immediate reflex from executives is usually just move everything to the cloud.
Oh, inevitably. And that reflex leads us to the second option, Azure VMware Solution, or AVS.
Microsoft Azure.
Right. This is essentially a specialized lift and shift bridge. Microsoft physically hosts the exact same VMware software stack, but they run it inside their own massive Azure data centers.
Okay.
The primary mechanical benefit here is sheer velocity. You do not have to rebuild or replatform your legacy applications. You simply migrate the virtual machines as they are directly into the Azure environment.
Wait, let me make sure I'm getting this. Moving your exact VMware setup into Microsoft's data center doesn't sound like it actually solves the underlying licensing cost issue. It just shifts who you're paying.
You hit the nail on the head. AVS is explicitly not a long-term cost saver. The operational costs currently sit between $6,500 and $15,000 per node every single month.
Yikes. So it's basically a very expensive Band-Aid.
It is utilized primarily as a transitional lifeboat. It allows an enterprise to quickly escape an impending multi-million-dollar on-premises hardware refresh and buys them a few years to slowly untangle and modernize their applications later.
Gotcha.
But the third option, and this is the one creating the most disruptive waves across the industry, is Proxmox VE.
The open source wildcard.
Precisely. Proxmox is built on a foundation of Debian Linux. The core virtualization software itself is entirely open source and free to download.
For free.
Free. You only pay for commercial support subscriptions if your enterprise requires guaranteed response times and expert assistance.
Okay, we need to break down the sheer math on Proxmox versus the new VMware bundles because the disparity is almost comical. Let's take a standard IT setup, a 3-node cluster, which essentially means 3 physical servers linked together to share the computing workload.
Okay, the math is sobering. If you run that standard 3-node cluster on VMware today, utilizing the mandatory new vSphere Foundation bundle, you are looking at an annual licensing cost of roughly 30,000 euros.
30 grand a year.
Right. Now, if you take those exact same 3 physical servers, wipe them, and install Proxmox, and then purchase their absolute highest tier enterprise subscription to ensure you have SLA-backed engineering support, your total software cost drops to just 600 euros per year.
30,000 euros versus 600 euros.
Yeah.
That is insane. To visualize this, it's like choosing between moving into a fully furnished luxury turnkey condo with Nutanix, renting an incredibly overpriced corporate hotel suite for a year while your house is being fumigated with AVS, or taking raw lumber and pouring your own concrete foundation with Proxmox. Proxmox requires you to build the house yourself, but the materials cost absolute pennies.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that pouring your own concrete analogy is exactly why Proxmox is suddenly so wildly attractive to corporations that feel burned by Broadcom.
Because they own the foundation.
Yeah, exactly. By adopting a fundamentally open source architecture, you completely sever the chain of vendor lock-in. Proxmox isn't just a basic hypervisor. It has incredibly sophisticated features engineered natively into the platform. For example, it utilizes Ceph software-defined storage.
Explain how Ceph works mechanically, because storage is usually where enterprise setups get incredibly expensive.
Traditionally, servers rely on highly expensive, centralized storage arrays. Ceph fundamentally changes that by pooling the internal hard drives of every individual server in your cluster into one massive shared brain.
So they all talk to each other.
Right, and if one physical hard drive suddenly catches fire and dies, the system doesn't crash. Ceph has already dynamically duplicated those exact bytes of data across 3 other servers in the cluster in real time.
Oh, wow.
The patient record or financial transaction never even blinks offline. And Proxmox includes this along with their enterprise-grade Proxmox backup server without demanding separate, exorbitant licensing fees.
Wait, hold on. Let me push back on this because there has to be a catch. You're telling me a multi-billion-dollar hospital where servers hold literal life and death patient data, where an outage could literally stop a surgery, is going to rip out their established infrastructure and trust their critical operations to free, open-source Linux software just to save on the licensing budget. That sounds incredibly reckless. You don't cheap out on a digital life support system.
It sounds counterintuitive until you realize that Debian Linux, the foundation of Proxmox, is already the bedrock of the modern internet.
True. Linux runs almost everything.
It runs global stock exchanges, it runs supercomputers, it runs systems on the International Space Station. The software itself is bulletproof. The real hurdle, the reason companies aren't migrating overnight, isn't a fear of the software failing. It is the daunting reality of the hidden costs of migration.
Right.
Transitioning enterprise IT is never just installing a new operating system. The licensing cost is only a fraction of the equation. The hidden technical debt and labor actually represent 50 to 60% of the total effort and expense of moving.
Okay, break those hidden costs down for me. Where is the real friction?
The first massive wall is staff reskilling. Your current IT department might possess decades of deeply specialized, proprietary experience managing VMware.
And now they have to learn something totally new.
Exactly. Proxmox requires a deep, fundamental understanding of Linux command line administration.
Which is a totally different skill set.
Completely. Then you face severe network reconfiguration challenges. If your hospital relied heavily on VMware's proprietary, heavily automated networking tools to route traffic, your engineers now have to manually rebuild those exact routing rules from scratch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, using Linux bridges and Open vSwitch within Proxmox. And finally, there is the incredibly treacherous minefield of Windows Server data center licensing.
Right, because most enterprises still run hundreds of Windows virtual machines, and Microsoft has notoriously aggressive and complex rules about how you are legally allowed to license those inside a virtual environment.
It is an auditing nightmare. Let's use an analogy. Under VMware, Microsoft effectively offered an all-you-can-eat buffet. If you bought one expensive Windows data center license for a physical server, Microsoft legally allowed you to spin up an infinite number of Windows virtual machines on that specific hardware.
Got it.
But when you tear out VMware and move to a different hypervisor like Proxmox, Microsoft suddenly changes the rules and wants to charge you per plate.
Ouch.
Preserving those unlimited virtualization rights requires incredibly meticulous cluster management and tracking. If your engineers configure it wrong, you might suddenly face a retroactive compliance audit from Microsoft that completely wipes out every single dollar you save by leaving VMware.
So it's basically walking through a technical minefield. You clearly can't just execute this migration on a random Friday night. So how are smart, risk-averse companies actually surviving this transition?
They utilize a highly disciplined, four-wave phased approach. You never attempt to dynamite the foundation of the skyscraper while the office workers are still inside.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what's wave one?
Wave 1 targets the absolute lowest risk workloads, development and testing environments. These are the isolated servers where engineers build and test new software. If a testing server goes offline for 3 hours during a migration hiccup, the hospital's emergency room doesn't notice.
And the strategic brilliance there is that by moving those non-critical dev and test servers first, the enterprise immediately shrinks its total VMware core count.
Exactly.
They can drop those specific servers from their upcoming Broadcom renewal, banking immediate, tangible financial savings, while simultaneously giving their IT team a low-stakes sandbox to learn the mechanical nuances of Proxmox.
It is a calculated strategic retreat. Once the engineering team builds muscle memory and confidence, they initiate Wave 2 and Wave 3, migrating internal operational tools and Tier 2 production workloads.
And then the big stuff.
Right. The absolute final step, Wave 4, is moving the highly complex, latency-sensitive SQL databases and the mission-critical applications that actually run the business.
And the actual mechanical tooling to execute this move is maturing rapidly, right? Proxmox recently released a native import wizard that fundamentally changes the labor equation.
Yes, it's a game changer.
Instead of rebuilding machines from scratch, it directly hooks into the VMware environment via an API and seamlessly pulls the virtual machines over, drastically accelerating the timeline. And we're seeing this exact playbook succeed in massive critical industries right now.
Absolutely. The University Hospital Essen is a perfect case study. They completely modernized their entire data center virtualization utilizing Proxmox VE and the Proxmox backup server.
Which ties directly back to our initial discussion on the vicious healthcare margin squeeze.
Exactly. Essen successfully utilized open source infrastructure as the digital foundation for their complex smart hospital system. They proved definitively that you can run highly critical, secure 2047 healthcare operations without bleeding capital to proprietary licensing fees.
It extends far beyond healthcare, too. Look at Big River Steel, a major U.S. steel producer. They migrated multiple critical manufacturing clusters away from VMware directly to Proxmox. Their stated goal wasn't just cost savings. It was gaining operational stability and deliberately reducing their systemic dependency on a single corporate vendor.
It's about taking back control.
Totally. And then you have AXS, a massive international payments infrastructure company. They architected a highly agile, rigorously compliant payment network directly on Proxmox. leveraging its built-in security hardening to process financial transactions. These are not small weekend hobbyist labs. These are multi-million-dollar industrial, medical, and financial operations betting their revenue on open source.
Which demonstrates unequivocally that the open source infrastructure alternative is no longer just a budget fallback for testing environments. It has matured into a fully enterprise-ready solution. The sheer financial violence of the cost disparity has forced these traditionally conservative companies to jump off the cliff, and they're discovering that the open source parachute actually works.
So to synthesize this entire complex journey for you, we're observing massive foundational pillars of our economy, like the healthcare sector, getting their operational budgets absolutely squeezed to the breaking point by shifting government policies and skyrocketing pharmaceutical costs.
Yeah.
To merely survive, they are forced to automate, leaning incredibly heavily on AI and data-driven technology. But at the exact moment they make that desperate pivot, an unprecedented pricing shock hits the IT world, directly threatening the budgets required for that automation.
It's the perfect storm.
And the fascinating result of this collision is a historic enterprise shift corporations fleeing the traps of proprietary software giants and actively seeking refuge in collaborative open source havens like Proxmox.
This raises an important question. As massive society-critical industries like healthcare, logistics, and global finance increasingly migrate their operations to open-source hypervisors out of financial necessity, what happens to the global pace of artificial intelligence and technological innovation when the foundational infrastructure of the internet is no longer controlled by a handful of proprietary tech giants, but is instead driven, funded, and evolved by open-source communities?
That is a profound paradigm shift and a thought that will definitely keep me up at night as we watch this infrastructure battle unfold. And on that note, be sure to check out the 100 TB immutable and air-gapped SSO NAS for $8,995 by Stonefly. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.